So we'll kick off the the rent guarantee webinar. Okay, so quickly on our agenda today, we'll go over a quick introduction to myself and Hannah. We'll talk a little bit about SingleKey. We've got some exciting new features we'll just kind of mention briefly that we've been working on here at SingleKey coming up here in the next few weeks to couple months. We'll talk on some strategies to help you protect your rental income. We'll talk about the rent guarantee overview and how to navigate the demand process. And then after that, at any point in the time, please queue up your question in the chat. And then at the end, we'll go over those questions in the live Q&A. So if you don't know who we are, my name is MacKenzie Wilson. I'm the Director of Customer Engagement here at SingleKey, as well as I'm a landlord in Calgary, Alberta. And I also run a Facebook group, the largest in Alberta for landlords, called the Alberta Landlord Community. And I generally focus on all of our in-house content and work together with the team to help build up new features to support the challenge of being a homeowner or a rental house provider here at SingleKey. Hannah, want to introduce yourself?
Awesome. Hey everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm on the rent guarantee team here at SingleKey. So I speak to landlords. I help them go through their tenant reports, help them get set up for the rent guarantee program, and assist if they ever have issues with their tenants not paying. I'll step in and help with the next steps there as well.
Perfect. Awesome. We're just looking at the chat right now. We've got quite a mix across the board. We got folks from even Saskatoon. We've got some out in Toronto, BC and Lower Mainland, and of course some in Alberta. So this is good. We've got quite an audience. So when we talk about the different conversations, Hannah and I will make sure to clarify the legislation that we're speaking about, because of course there are nuances and differences from each of the provinces. Okay, quickly about SingleKey. So we started in 2018. We got really kind of probably more known in 2019 when we started really getting a lot of traction in the market. We've been growing quite steady. We've crossed over 120,000 landlords across the country. And really, I would say from a market perspective, we're probably the most comprehensive report on the market and most popular by and far now compared to some of the other options out there. We also offer rent collection, which is basically where you can collect rent, which is like paying a utility bill from a checking account. It's done through pre-authorized debit. We can kind of talk a little bit about that as well. And then I'll let Hannah get into our rent guarantee, which is the primary purpose of today's webinar. So this is pretty exciting. We've got a bunch of new features coming out. We just already launched, I think back in February, our new credit report. It's been completely reformatted. We've added a bunch of new data points or information as well to make it even more comprehensive. And really our goal here at SingleKey is on the risk mitigation side. We want to give you as much accurate information as possible to make the most informed decision when you select your next tenant for a vacancy, and along other parts of that tenancy process too. We've added, probably in the next couple months here, we'll have tenants will be able to purchase their own reports. So when they come to a viewing, they viewed your property, they go, great, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I want to rent from you. They can actually hand you a copy of their SingleKey credit score. I'll say from your perspective, that's going to probably shortlist them if they understand that they've already bringing that key piece of information to the table. Of course, though, if the tenants are handing you the report now, there's still an opportunity for the tenant to perhaps Photoshop or alter that report. So all of our new reports come with a QR code. And what that does is, as you as a landlord, you can scan that with your phone or your device. You will then log into your SingleKey account. We'll add that report to your account for free, so you don't get charged for it. And then it also benefits the tenant at the same time, because now they've protected their credit score from getting multiple hits from inquiries as they go around to different rental listings to then hopefully get in for an application. Next, we've added an ID check. So basically now we've added the need for a selfie on the report. Plus, of course, we've always had the government issued ID, but now we run a scan or facial recognition, and then we'll give you a confidence rating as well that person in the selfie is in fact the person in the ID. Again, we're trying to get you guys started with a very strong foundation of documentation to kick off the tenancy. Also coming up here very, very soon is now a dual report between Equifax and TransUnion. myself and a few other team members have dived into a lot of reports on the same individuals, and we're coming out with a bit of a study that we've done, and it's been quite interesting knowing or seeing that there's always been a notion that we expected the same kind of information across two of the bureaus. And to a degree, that is true. But what was surprising how much nuances and differences there are between the two credit bureaus on the same applicant. And we'll have a bit of a little report to kind of explain the differences, and if you're considering doing both of a dual report. Lastly, that's also launching here very soon is international credit checks. We've partnered up with a company called Nova Credit, and they have done a really good job to give us access to, I think if I quote this right, Hannah, is it over 200 or 280 countries that they can now we can pull credit from? So this is
Yeah.
really going to give you guys the ability for any new Canadians coming in, ability to bring their existing credit score with them, so they can get a better chance of qualifying and getting into a rental, and giving you that confidence as well, because now you've got more information again to make that decision with. Awesome.
Great. I'm going to be going through a few strategies that landlords can take in order to protect their rental income. So first of all, and kind of like Mac had mentioned with all of the new products we're launching shortly, it's all to help landlords make sure that they're properly vetting their tenants before they actually place them at their properties. And this is really your number one opportunity where you can spot any potential red flags on your renter before actually handing them over the keys and signing the lease with them. We really want to make sure that you're placing tenants not in a rush. You don't want to rush placing tenant. You want to make sure that you're getting all the proper documentation. And I know it can be tricky, especially in the winter months where maybe things are a bit slower to just put the first person you get in the property. But it's really important to make sure that you're taking the time to do that diligence screening. So one of the first steps would be to run the tenant report on the applicant. You don't want to just necessarily take a credit report directly from a tenant because, as I'm sure everyone's seen who's on the webinar right now, it's so easy to falsify documents these days. There's so many different online apps where you can just edit a PDF version of the credit report and send it over to your landlord. And that's where, the QR code verification is going to come in handy for tenants that do provide a copy of the report directly to their landlord. So, properly running that report on your tenant, making sure that you're getting proof of income before you move forward with the tenant. I always take a look at proof of income documents to make sure they're recent. You want to make sure they're from within the past 30 days. You can't accept a pay stub that's 6 months old, for example, because you don't know if the tenant's still working there, right? So recent proof of income is always important, making sure it has the tenant's name on it, shows you what their gross income amounts are. Just taking the time to really diligently look through that proof of income documentation to make sure the tenant can afford the rent at your property is really important before moving forward with them. And then also doing all of those reference checks, right? So don't just call the number the tenant's provided you with, find the company online and reach out to them at their number listed on Google or on their website. Taking, even an extra day or two to just properly follow those steps instead of just relying solely on what the tenants provided you can really save you a lot of headache down the line. Yeah, sorry, Mac, did you have anything to add there?
No, those are great points. I think like you mentioned, especially with, like, if you're doing the employer check, is um, we try to provide you all the information, but it kind of comes back to that saying trust but verify. The due diligence responsibility is onus is still on you as the individual landlord or property manager. And like Hannah said, yeah, like Googling directly to the company and following up and using the main reception line to phone in, and then for sure you're talking to the right person at that company, whether it be the manager or HR, to verify. If you use some of the contact information directly provided through the application that came from the tenant, um, and especially if it's not marked as if it's like a Gmail or other accounts that don't really show you that they're directly from a company, like at telus.com, for example, then you don't really know if you're talking to a legitimate employer.
Exactly. No, for sure. The next step that we typically recommend is to set up the automated rent collection. This just gives you one more, helps automate things at your property. So one less thing to worry about every month. You're not necessarily worrying about having to remind the tenant. We'll automatically email your tenant each month to remind them to ensure that the funds are in their bank account. That being said, I know that a lot of landlords do still collect rent via e-transfer or check each month. So if that is the route that you're choosing to take, I typically also recommend making sure that you've set up your own personal reminders to follow up with your tenant. So set yourself a recurring calendar invite every month on, say, the 4th or the 5th to follow up with your tenant if you haven't received the rent yet. And if you haven't received the rent, it's always important to also send the notice of the non-payment of rent within a timely manner. And I'll get more into that when I speak about the rent guarantee. But just making sure that you have those checks and balances in place to do those follow-ups with the tenant on the rent each month. Don't just let it slide if you haven't gotten the rent for 2 or 3 weeks and hope that the tenant eventually pays you. It's always good to stay on top of that to make sure you're getting the rent on time each month, so the tenant knows you're serious about the timely payment of rent as well, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add one quick thing on a side note housekeeping issue. I think I breezed by this in the agenda. Please ask your questions in the chat. We'll mark them with a wave emoji that we've captured your questions, and then as we go through and answer them, we'll mark them with a thumbs up as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and then the third step would be to set up the rent guarantee program. And this basically helps make sure you're covered for those things that you can't necessarily screen against initially, right? You can't know if someone's going to lose their job in 6 months down the line after they're in your property, or if they'll go through a breakup, or there's also tenants that can pay the rent, but they stop paying for whatever reason as well. So having the rent guarantee in place makes sure that you're still able to get your rent payment each month for the time it would take to evict a non-paying tenant. And I get asked quite often if someone will get a credit report back for a tenant and they've got a 750 credit score, they've got a decent job. It doesn't look like they might necessarily be a risky tenant. But Mac and I were talking earlier, and it's important to weigh your risks as a landlord, right? If that tenant ends up losing their job in 6 months, are you going to be able to cover your mortgage and property expenses for the next 8 months for the time it takes to evict them? So taking those things into consideration and seeing, this tenant does look good, but I want to make sure that I'm still covered in case anything does happen.
Mhm.
That's where we're able to help a lot of landlords and property owners with our rent guarantee coverage.
Yeah, and to add on to what Hannah said, I know we've got people watching from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and maybe a few other provinces. If I've missed some of the comments that come in, um, what our rent coverage does really well with two demographics of landlords. Certainly, if you're in the BC and the Ontario's, where your guys' eviction times can be more challenging to evict a tenant once you have them in place, especially if they stop paying rent. And then the timing, I know for sure in Ontario with the Landlord and Tenant Board, it's up to 8 months right now. If you do a perfect process to do an eviction, what is your risk tolerance if they stop paying rent? Can you float the mortgage, your insurance, property taxes, those other costs associated if you're not getting that income in? And I think that's probably really the best question to ask yourself, because if that's something that would put you in a very challenging position financially, then this might make a lot of sense for you to look at the rent guarantee. And really, that's a personal decision that we can just kind of give you the facts and talk about how the program works, and up to you guys to make that judgment based on your own risk tolerance.
Exactly. And on that note, I'll go through our rent guarantee program in a bit more detail because it is one of the products that we get asked quite a few questions about. Um, at a high level, the rent guarantee is going to cover you for up to 12 months of rent if your tenant does stop paying. So we'll continue to cover the rent for the time it takes you to evict the tenant for up to 12 months. And like Mac mentioned, different provinces, different states, we all have our different eviction timelines right now. So that's why we do cover up to 12 months to make sure that you're covered for the full time it takes to evict that non-paying tenant. We'll also cover you for up to 30 days if the tenant breaks the lease without giving the proper notice to the landlord. So if they do a midnight move, for example, they don't give you the proper notice that they're going to be leaving and you don't have time to find a new tenant, we'll make sure to cover you for 30 days there. And then we'll also cover you for up to $10,000 in malicious damage if they vandalize the property. You're covered for that as well. We'll cover for the legal process. So you've got $1,500 in paralegal and eviction fees covered. If you do need to go through that eviction process, we can always connect you with one of our partners, or you're welcome to use your own paralegal if there's someone you prefer to move forward with there. And then included with the rent guarantees is our other services as well. So you'll have use of the automated rent collection tool, and we'll include the cost of 2 tenant reports with the rent guarantee fee as well.
Yeah, yeah, and to add on to what Hannah said as well, we're just as motivated as you to remove a non-paying tenant out of your property as quickly as possible to get you back up and running to re-rent it out and start collecting rent again. Because if we're paying on our policy as well, and it's costing us money if we keep that tenant in, so we want to move as quickly as possible. Which is why across the different provinces we've got a list of eviction specialists or paralegals, depending on which province you're in. They go by different names. That we want to get them out as quick as possible. And we would recommend for most people too, if this is relatively a new process, to use those experts. They're going to know the nuances in the law, and that might be the difference from saving you a couple months to maybe even longer if the process isn't followed properly. I know, particularly in Ontario, if you guys go through the eviction process and you don't have all your T's crossed, your I's dotted, you essentially reset that timer, and that can get quite costly if you're going into over a year trying to evict someone.
Exactly. Awesome. And then I'll speak a bit about the demand process because this is also a common question we get when we discuss the rent guarantee program with landlords. They typically want to know what the next steps are if their tenant ever does end up defaulting. We usually ask that the landlord lets us know right away if there is any issues with the tenants defaulting. That way we can help with the next steps there and making sure that we're sending out the proper documents to the tenant. So if you let us know that your tenant has defaulted and you haven't sent the notice of non-rent payment yet, we can always help with sending that over. We'll generally reach out to the tenant as well to let them know what the next steps are if they don't pay the rent within the time frame listed on the notice. So on Ontario here, that's the N4 notice that we would help you send out.
Mhm.
If they don't pay within that time frame, like I mentioned, we can connect you with one of our paralegal partners. They'll be able to help you with filing for the eviction and make sure that, like Mac said, all of your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, just so things can be done as efficiently as possible. And even though we know in many provinces it still takes quite a while to go through that process, we do want to try to help you get through it as efficiently as possible, right? Typically, it takes about 30 days for a demand to be processed, so it isn't immediate. I get asked a lot if, for example, if the rent collection doesn't go through due to non-sufficient funds in the tenant's account, if the rent guarantee payment is automatic. It's not automatic because oftentimes a tenant might pay via a different means that month. They might send the landlord an e-transfer instead. So we'd want the landlord to reach out to us to let us know that the tenant hasn't paid so we can help with the next steps there. And then we'll continue covering the rent for you for the time that it takes for up to 12 months. And we're also available for ongoing support. So if you are going through a demand, if say 3 months in, you end up speaking to the tenant and they end up catching up a partial amount, we can help in those kinds of situations too, to make sure that you're supported through the process for the eviction if the tenant doesn't pay, or if they do come up with a payment plan with the landlord, we can help with that as well.
Very cool. Yeah. Some basic questions I'm seeing coming through here before we jump into the live Q&A. I'll just no, we can leave it off. Hannah, what's the cost of the program? And another common question I know we get as well is, can I start halfway through? I already have an existing tenant. They've moved in. They've been with me for X number of months. Can I still use the rent guarantee program?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get those questions all the time. In terms of program cost, it's either 5.5% if you're paying on a monthly basis, or it would be 5% of the annual rent if you pay up front. Either way, the program does initially run for 12 months, similar to a standard lease. And then after that, it would move forward on a month-to-month basis. So if your tenant does stay at the property after the first year, you can maintain that coverage. And I always like to point out that you're covered for up to 12 months from the point of default. not if, say, for example, you've been on the rent guarantee program for 6 months, you're not only covered for an additional 6, you'd be covered for 12 from the point they actually default, even if that's during their second year living at the property, which we've seen happening recently. For existing tenants, you can set them up as well, but we generally need more documentation at that point. So we would need proof that they've been paying their rent on time and up to date for at least 6 months, and that there's no other issues with the tenant. We wouldn't accept, if you're already evicting the tenant for a different reason, we wouldn't be able to set up the rent guarantee for you at that point. And then we'd need a copy of the lease agreement that you have with the tenant as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, we'll hop into the live Q&A. I've got some trusted team members in the background queuing up our questions. So if we get the first one on the screen, that would be great. Okay. Are you doing commercial as well?
So we don't offer the rent guarantee for commercial properties. It would just be residential rentals that we offer the rent guarantee program for.
Couple of questions. International, ID international or only Canadian? And is there a list of countries we can see for the credit report by Nova Credit? We can definitely get you the list of countries, so we can make a note of that. And then I'm just trying to understand the other part of the question. The Nova Credit check would be for non-Canadians new to the country. If they're already Canadian, likely then they'd be covered by our standard report that does both Equifax and soon to be TransUnion. Is there any way to check if a permanent resident cards are legit? That's a good question. That's a good takeaway. We'll see if there's a source. I mean, that would be dependent if at the federal level the government's given us a registry online that we could run and check a number. I don't know personally if that exists today, but certainly worth researching. And I think the next best thing too is seeing the card physically in person to make sure it doesn't look like it's been, altered with a if it's been modified physically in any fashion or means. I'm trying to think of if there's any other ways, but yeah, to be determined.
Yeah, and I can't remember, Mac, if you'd mentioned this earlier, but we are going to be offering additional ID verification for our reports as well. So that'll be something that you'll be able to do through our platform moving forward shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we did mention that briefly. And I think probably what's important to us. So actually, what might kind of help you with this one is what it does. It takes the selfie picture, so you get a really recent picture of the tenant applying. I know personally, from my personal experience, I've done a viewing, and then I've gotten a report 2 or 3 days later, maybe 4, and then I'm looking at the ID uploaded that's over 5 years old, and it looks completely different from the person I remember speaking to. And then I'm kind of struggling with, like, is this in fact the person I just saw 3 days ago? I'm not sure. Now with this new process with the ID verification where we have the selfie included, we do a facial comparison. It just starts you from a much stronger position of documentation. So something important to look at. But really, I think the best way for seeing if any ID is legit is if you can go to the source. There's usually, ideally, there's a registry at each provincial level. They can check the numbers. That's a good takeaway question we can look in further on. What is a good income to rent ratio?
Yeah, good question. It really depends on what the landlord or property manager is comfortable with. For our rent guarantee program, we need to see that the rent to income ratio is below 45%, and that will be based on the gross household income. So if there's multiple applicants, we'd be able to take into account both of their incomes to get to that ratio.
Awesome. Yeah. Um, and like just speaking from an industry kind of perspective, generally the norm's been, I said it backwards, the income to rent ratio. Generally, the norm across the industry has been somewhere between 30 and 35% is generally what's considered good. So if they have, if it's less than that, then that's ideal. But that also probably kind of speaks to what we're trying to do with the rent guarantee program, where it's quite liberal at that 45% cutoff. How to use SingleKey for student rentals?
Yeah, I mean, you could still, for students, I mean, often they're quite young, right? So they might not necessarily have credit history. But if they're over 18, they generally will, and you could still run their credit report through SingleKey. Quite often, I'll speak to landlords and property managers who are also having the student add a guarantor to the lease agreement. So it's usually always a good idea to run the report on the guarantor as well, just to make sure that they would be able to financially support the student while they're attending, to make sure that that would work out. In terms of the rent guarantee, we generally we still want to see that 45% rent to income ratio. So it is tricky if students don't have income to approve that, but if they have a guarantor and the guarantor can demonstrate that they would meet the criteria for the program, we can sometimes approve those on a case by case basis.
Do you have a go, no go automated decision indicator on tenant screening? Um, I can kind of run with this and then Hannah fill in as
Mhm.
well. Um, we so if you notice from the new report to the old report, if you've been a customer of ours for a bit, by the way, thank you. We removed something called a single key score. We've really taken the position that our job is to give you as much accurate information as possible, but we don't influence the decision making process. It's your responsibility as the homeowner or the landlord to do your own due diligence and to make a decision. So we provide an Equifax or a TransUnion credit score, but we don't want to or imply whether you should or should not choose someone. Ultimately, that's really your decision to make. Okay. Are we required to send multiple tenant reports when multiple people are renting together? It appears when the report comes back, they're reported on separately, which requires us to reach out to single queue and trying to apply to the rent guarantee.
Yeah, so if you are renting to multiple people, it's generally a good idea to run the tenant report on both of them, because when we approve the rent guarantee, we look at the application as a whole. So
Mhm.
if there are two applicants, we would want to see both of their credit reports. We'd want to see both of their proof of income. If you're getting back two separate reports, when you sign up for the rent guarantee via your single key account, you can upload multiple documents. So it'll let you add up to, I think, 5 tenants. You can upload both of those credit reports, upload both of their proof of income, and then we'll be able to qualify them as a couple or as a group if there's multiple people. And
Mhm.
we'll be able to let you know if they qualify for the rent guarantee or if maybe there's any other documentation we would need.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add on to that as well. Generally, and I'll explain the exception as well, but the best practice is anyone that's an adult or Asian majority in your province that's going to be living at the rental that's applied to it should be run with a credit check and should be on your lease. So basically, again, this kind of goes back to hope for the best, prepare for the worst. If something goes sideways, that means you've got more people to go after or bank accounts to collect arrears or unpaid rent or damages or whatever it might be. The exception to the rule is say if you've got a really strong tenant that can float the lease by themselves, and perhaps they've just brought in a new roommate, or perhaps they're just in a new boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it might be. Again, you can't ask for that information, by the way, because that's relationship status. But if they generally disclose it, then now you know it's fair game. But that in some of those cases, if you've got a strong enough single candidate, maybe it might be worth for you just to keep only one person on the lease. But generally, you want more all the adults on your lease because then they're legally responsible. You can go after them, and this is actually the same as well for the guarantor as well. If you do a co-signer that doesn't live at the property, you still want to do a full credit check on them and have them on the lease as well, because that's really the purpose of the guarantor is to go after them because they're supposed to financially support the lease with the other tenant. Lots of information. Okay. If you use the rent guarantee program, do your rates go up in the future, like home insurance? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, actually, I get this question a lot, whether, if you put in a demand and we pay out the rent for you, if when you set up your next tenant, if you'd have to pay a higher percent. The great thing is that the cost doesn't go up. It stays the same for every tenant you set up. Because it's a little bit different with like car insurance. If you get into a fender bender, for example, your rates generally go up because you're going to be the same person driving the car after that accident. Versus with the rent guarantee, you're going to be getting a new tenant after we complete the demand. So the risk totally changes with that new tenant. We would still just maintain the same pricing, the 5% annual or 5.5% monthly.
Yeah, that's a great question. Can a landlord declare the rent to credit bureau with the consent of the tenant, of course?
Yeah, so with the rent collection tool, you'd be able to do that through our platform. Um, you would need to initially enter your banking details and then send the tenant an invite to complete it on their end as well. So they would need to enter their banking details and consent to the rent collection in order for us to do that on our end.
Yeah. To add on to that, so there's two situations here. If the tenant's in good standing, it's their choice and their decision, and they have to voluntarily consent to have that information reported to the credit bureau. If they are, if there's rent arrears outstanding, or there's damages and there's a sum of money owed that's gone past the expected period to pay it off, then it does. I mean, there are some nuances. Again, there's a federal, I think it's under PIPA, and then there's a couple of provinces that have their own legislations, but I can speak specifically to Alberta. Then you have the ability to go and report them without consent because there's an obligation owed to you. That's financial. Okay. I'm a realtor and I rent out properties for my clients. How can your guarantee help my clients? Oh, or does the single key only give, sorry, or does single key only give rental guarantee only to those landlords who rent directly through single key? Oh, that's also a really good question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we do work with a lot of realtors to offer the rent guarantee for their clients. Generally, what you'd be able to do is when you have a rental application for the property that you've listed, you can send us or apply through your account with the tenant report and the proof of income and any other application documents you've collected for the potential tenant. And it would kind of work the same way. We'd be able to let you know whether the tenant is approved for the program or not before you decide to move forward with them. And then generally what we do is once we approve the guarantee, we can just transfer it over to your client's SingleKey account. So if there is an issue 6 months down the line, your client doesn't have to bug you. They can just reach out to us directly and we'd be able to help them with the next steps to make sure they're covered.
Oops, sorry, I clicked off that. That was me.
No, you're
Uh,
good.
so next question. Um, do you serve the N4 notice to tenant via email? This is for Ontario landlords.
Yeah, so generally the N4, if the landlord needs assistance with that, once they've put in a demand, we typically send it out via mail to the tenant. We'll send it out via express post, and that way we have confirmation that it's been delivered. I know there are LTB forms that the landlord can sign with the tenant to have them consent to receiving notices via email, but generally we'll typically just send that out via the mail, just so we have confirmation it's been delivered. And then we can use that information if we do need to move forward with the eviction.
Okay, why your rent services agreement includes a clause that puts onus only on the landlord to verify the authenticity of those submitted documents? What if SingleKey approves such a tenant for the rent guarantee program and later the documents are identified to be deficient, falsified? Will the demand payment be not honored in that scenario?
Yeah, this is a question we get a lot as well. It's we basically have that clause in the rent guarantee agreement because we want landlords to still do their due diligence before renting to someone. we don't want you to apply for the rent guarantee, but then not reach out to any references, not do your due diligence before actually renting to the person just because you have the rent guarantee. That being said, if you do all of the checks, you do those reference checks, and it turns out that the tenant still ends up defaulting down the line, and we'd approve the rent guarantee, you're still going to be covered. But we do want landlords to still go through those proper checks before they rent to a tenant, and it kind of goes back to making sure you're doing those proper screening before
Mhm.
signing the lease. You don't want to rush that process, or quickly go through it, not collect proper documents, just to get a tenant at your property. You want to make sure you're still doing your due diligence there.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. It's a best practice. I mean, ultimately, this
Mhm.
is your property. It's you're responsible for it, and you don't want to outsource that part. There should be some level of you doing your own due diligence. Um, just simply put, like we're a complimentary service to take that risk away, but there's that 100% the expectation all parties are doing their own due diligence.
Mhm. Exactly. And I usually, we do have our team that reviews rent guarantee applications, so we can often help if we do see any potential red flags before approving it, but that doesn't take away the responsibility to still do your own due
Mhm.
diligence as well.
Yeah. Uh, do you
Do
have
you
do you have or provided a standard lease document for your customers?
Yeah, we do have templates available directly via our website for landlords. I know most provinces do have a standard lease that you'd need to use, but we have all of those agreements available via our website that landlords can download, and sign with their tenants.
Yeah, I'll add on to that as well. So obviously some provinces have standardized the lease. Speaking specifically to Ontario, out here in Alberta, we have very specific requirements to our RTA of language that needs to be included in the lease, but there is no standard lease in Alberta. So um, individuals are given that ability to shape it. I believe that's something similar in Saskatchewan. I'm not sure on BC, so I won't comment to that. We do on within our blog and resources, we've gone through and built quite a few resources that will support it. But again, just really, this is an important part for you to be aware of the legislation that you operate within, because of course this is the documentation that supports you as a landlord. So it has to be, and you want to be, of course, very accurate and compliant within your legislation.
What
What's
is the small print for the rent guarantee? Edmund, we do have a sample rent guarantee agreement. We can definitely provide you with a copy of that. And then we also have a Calendly link we can send out for our rent guarantee team. So if you wanted to review the rent guarantee agreement and go over any questions together before signing up, our team is always happy to do that.
Yeah, if I'm reading into this question as well, and I'm sure you guys are doing your due diligence, which is great. Hence why you're on this webinar. You've done your searches. There are some comments out there on some of the social platforms where that they say, we don't pay out on the rent guarantee. There is an obligation that you are acting in compliance with the law and in good faith. We have unfortunately had a scenario where we've had few individuals that weren't acting within the legislation, the RTA, and we can't guarantee that. So do your due diligence, do the research out there. We'll provide all the fine print as well, so you guys can sit through and review it.
Is
That's
the
a good
rent
question.
guarantee? Yeah, we offer the rent guarantee coverage Canada-wide, and we actually also offer the rent guarantee coverage in the US as well. So every province, it doesn't matter where your rental is located, we could still offer the rent guarantee program for you.
Yeah. We just Quebec was is it just recently added, Hannah, that we because before that that wasn't covered, but we now have that.
Exactly, yeah, that was recent. So for any properties in Quebec, previously we couldn't offer the rent guarantee, but that is available now as well.
Canada and US, very cool.
Mhm.
Okay. Would tenant required to pay for 2 months rent if they gave only 15 days notice before leaving? Pat, you'll have to give us what province you're in because that's a very much a depends kind of answer.
Yeah. And I think to quickly add on, for the rent guarantee program, it's dependent on if the tenant doesn't give proper notice for the province or state you're in. You'd be covered for 30 days of rent in that kind of situation to give you time to find a new tenant.
Awesome. Yeah, and especially in tighter markets right now, which I think is generally across Canada, we're also in that housing crisis across the country. A well-priced rental, marketed well and doing your due diligence, you should have lots of applications and it should rent within a month. If that's not happening right now, then there's probably a disconnect in that process. And that would probably be another whole show in that conversation. Does the landlord pay to the paralegal upfront, then SingleKey pays back, or does SingleKey take care of the payments? Oh, good question.
Yeah, good question. And Raka, I'm going to give you a call this afternoon as well. I know I owe you a phone call back, but in this kind of situation, it would typically depend on if the landlord is using one of our paralegals or if they're using their own. Generally, with the paralegal partners we have, they'll typically invoice us directly. If a landlord is using their own paralegal and they've already paid up front, then we would just ask them to send us a copy of the invoice that they paid out on, so we can send that to our demands team, and you're covered for up to 1,500.
Awesome. Good question. So if it's in-house, one of our partners will pay it directly. If chosen to your own, proof of payment, we need the documentation to reimburse.
Exactly.
Okay. That previous question from Pat, he's from Ontario, or he or she. Can we re-show that question again? Just trying to find it as well. Okay, so from Ontario. So would the tenant require to pay 2 months for rent if they gave only 15-day notice before leaving?
Yeah, so generally, if I get this question a lot where when landlords let me know that their tenant has tried to give less than the standard 60 days notice, um, I usually recommend that the landlord responds to that request to remind the tenant of what proper notice would be. If they still refuse and they end up just leaving the property, it is tricky. That's often out of the landlord's control. But with the rent guarantee, we'll still cover you for 30 days in those kinds of situations. And often in Ontario specifically, the landlord would still have the last month's rent on file. So that would also help with bridging the gap there if a tenant doesn't give you proper 60 days notice.
Okay. Does the 5.5% cover the rent guarantee or only or including other services like tenant screening process, rent collection service?
The 5.5%, the rent collection tool is included for every property you set up on the rent guarantee. So that's totally included, no additional fees there. The tenant report will reimburse you for the cost of 2 tenant reports for each rent guarantee you set up. So say you screen a couple for your property, you end up moving forward with them, and you set up the rent guarantee. We'll just reimburse you for the reports once your rent guarantee starts.
Yeah, so in short, we'll cover your rent collection. You get 2 reports included with each rent guarantee. Anything beyond that, then you'll be on a pay-per-use. If they're using the rent collection tool, when is it reported to Equifax and how long exactly? Yeah, Rose, good question. So we're we're in the works with that still with Equifax. They've asked us to report that information, which is why we're saying we can do it. Right now, our challenge is on the logistics side is just working with Equifax in the background for them to actually get the data from us. So it's a bit of more of a logistics issue or challenge that we're just looking to wrap up with Equifax. It's unfortunately taking longer than we had hoped for, but it is coming. Do the arrears show on the credit report as a trade line, or how does it show on the credit report? Again, because we're still trying to wrap this loop up with Equifax, I don't want to mislead you, so I don't have the answer on that. When we do get that clarification from Equifax, we'll absolutely show you exactly how it's being done, or share with you. Excuse me. Edmund, ID check is on the Canadian document, or also can it check example a UA driving license? So this is a good question. This is probably a takeaway for Nova. because they've essentially compiled all the international credit reporting data from the different agencies across, depending on the country. So, because UAE is that United Arab, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
would have to take that away and check into for you. I can't answer that one specifically. Is a rent collection service a monthly fixed fee or based on the percentage of the rent collection? There is no fee for it for the first two, and then I think after, or is it first three? Hannah, I can't
Yeah,
remember.
first three. Yeah.
First three, it's free, and then after that, we'll do a bulk discount depending on your situation. Does that sound right, Hannah? My
Exactly. Yeah,
okay,
you got it. And
perfect.
one quick thing to add, it's free for every property you have set up on the rent guarantee. So if you have more than 3 rent guarantees, your rent collection's included for all of them, not just the first 3.
Yeah, I'm not a member yet, but would like to have the service to put the name of the tenant and arrears onto credit. Uh, Tenant ran that credit report using SingleKey when doing a rental application with me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is this tenant already living at your property, or I think we just need to know if they're a new tenant, you could definitely set up the rent guarantee now with them before they move in. But if it's an existing tenant that's already defaulting and they're not on the rent collection, we can only report arrears that are through our rent collection tool.
Yeah, and a little clarity of how that works is Equifax needs to know that because we do the rent collection on behalf of you, we see the money being withdrawal and we see it going into the landlord's account or your account. That information is very clean data that Equifax, I keep saying Equifax wants, and which is why we're working with them to get that put into the credit reporting. If it's happened outside that system, then you have to look at a different service or collection agency to get that information onto the debt reporting or onto the credit score. Sorry. For information of the rental application details, do you just ask the tenant to answer some questions of a list of questions, or do you personally do the due diligence? So if I'm reading this correctly, so when you guys get a report from us, it's comprised of many different sources. There's a very detailed application that we have, and all that information in the application is directly supplied by the tenant. They're the ones filling out their rental history, their addresses, if they've got pets, all that kind of good stuff. So again, we're presenting you the information. We don't do due diligence on it. I think I saw another question too, talking about if we vet bank statements or any of those other things. We allow those documents to be uploaded by the tenant. So if they want to add some bank statements, a letter of reference, a letter from a previous landlord, employment letter of reference, um, all those different things, we'll collect it, but we're not scanning or doing any due diligence on it. Uh, no, we're not. So that's essentially, again, giving you guys the information and being presented to you for your own personal evaluation. Do we need any extra documentation for rent guarantors who will be providing security to the lease? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, usually I think for guarantors, we generally also would want to see the tenant report and their proof of income, because since they're signing on as a guarantor, we want to make sure that they'd be able to cover the rent for the tenant if the tenant didn't pay. So generally, we would take their own monthly debt obligations into consideration to make sure that they could cover both that, and then also the rent for the tenant, should the initial tenant default on the rent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, a co-signer or a guarantor, treat them exactly the same as a tenant. They go
Mhm.
through the exact same due diligence process because they're taking that financial responsibility for the individual who will be living at the property. Um, I know we're working on this. I don't know where it is in terms of a roadmap, but we're doing a streamline flow. If someone's just a rent guarantor or co-signer, some of the questions that we obviously ask, like do they have pets, won't be applicable. We are working on a streamlined flow for those individuals, so you'll follow their experience, and then in return, you guys will get again more complete applications to do that decision making process on. Antonio, what happens if an applicant opens up an application but does not complete it? Do we get a refund? I'll let you take this one, Hannah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great question. So if you send out an invite for a report to a tenant, you choose to pay for it, and you don't hear back from them, they ghost you. We just place a hold on your credit card initially, and if they don't fill the application in within a week, within 7 days, we'll just release that hold. The funds will go back onto your credit card, so you won't get charged.
Yeah, so in short, we do give you a refund. Um, on that note, with our platform, you have the choice to either pay for the cost personally, or you can push the application fee to the tenant. Um, so that's something to keep in mind, depending on what kind of market condition you're in. The other thing to note, though, if you're in British Columbia, your legislation does not allow you to charge any kind of fees on applications. So unfortunately, you guys cannot do it. Gunner, what is considered a decent credit score for a renter? Um, we've done a study, and I have to know where I can find this information. You can include it in the email in the follow up. We know on average a renter's credit score versus the average Canadian that is a homeowner. They're about on average 20 some points lower, but this is probably why it's also really important to you want to shortlist your candidates and do 10 or do the credit scores on multiple parties. So if you've got 2 or 3 parties applying, because then you've got that comparison of what other type of applicants you're getting in and where their credit scores are at. That really gives you that context you need. Generally speaking, across the country, um, I I mean, this is again a little bit more subjective, so again, it depends on your risk tolerance. So I'll speak from my position. If I see a credit score, I would probably be at that 650, 675 on the low end. I'd love to be above that. Obviously, if it's in the 700s, then you've got someone that's really financially sound or strong.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll quickly add in too, for the rent guarantee, we aren't looking for a specific credit score. We're more so looking at why someone's credit score might be lower if you do have an applicant with a low credit score. So for example, someone might have a credit score in the 500s, and their bill payments are being paid on time each month, but they just have high usage on their credit cards,
Hmm.
versus someone else with the same score might have multiple recent collections and bills that they're past due on. So usually for the rent guarantee, if it's a lower score but things are being paid and their rent to income ratio checks out, we can still potentially approve them.
Oh, that's great. That would be expensive, as SingleKey charges each person $25 and then $25 for the guarantee. Do most properties make the applicants pay? Yeah, no, it is. It does absolutely does add up, which is why we're kind of getting back to you're going to want to shortlist and run them through the full application once you've qualified a bit beforehand. Excuse me. The other thing to note though is that does seem expensive up front, but to put the right person in a rental property, this is really pennies on the dollar for any of the negative outcomes if you don't do this, if you don't do your due diligence right on the back end. Typical eviction cost in Alberta for unpaid rent, typically 3 or 4 months. That's $4,000 or $5,000, and then the damage and then really the stress that comes along with it. So it is some cost up front, but really you're investing for really a smooth tenancy down the road. Okay, by having a guarantor as a tenant, aren't you creating a tenant relationship, i.e., they acquire tenant rights under the legislation? Wouldn't it be better to generate a separate guarantor paperwork? Um, I mean, again, this is really dependent on your provincial legislation, but you're gonna want them on the lease. Also, you won't have a legal obligation to go after them financially if there's any arrears or damages from the other tenant. That's the whole point of it. So, I don't really see an idea to work around that. Where if you do a separate agreement, because then you'd probably be forced into civil litigation, which is a whole different pieces of legislation and process. I can't speak to that because I'm not uh, super familiar with those areas. But I think, and if you're going to LTB or RTUS or your provincial board, um, and you've made it more complex by pulling information out, you're probably not helping your case, and it will make it a little bit more difficult to win that order or hearing that you're going for. In Alberta, can we charge or make the tenant pay for the rent guarantee program upfront for the entire year or on a monthly basis, or can we add it to the rent on a monthly basis? So I'll speak to this in Alberta, and then Hannah, I think you should add it in as well.
Mhm.
What I would suggest doing is you would just want to increase your rent. If you're going to go rent to someone and they qualify for it, instead of pushing that as a line item charge back to the tenant, just pad it into your numbers for your rent. That's really the best way to go about it. And you have that cost covered. Plus, then you're charging a bit more rent. And if you're in that growth, so I mean, kind of a tip along, if you're in that growth phase for building out your portfolio, the higher rents you charge look better for a qualification to the mortgage brokers and the institutions that do the lending. So
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. It's trickier to enforce having the tenant pay for the rent guarantee, particularly if it's separate from the rent. So if you just include it in your rental price when you're setting that initially, it would just make that easier.
yeah. Okay, so we're getting close to the top of the hour. We'll take one more question and then we'll wrap it up here.
Mhm.
Okay. If a landlord has a rental guarantee and tenant does not pay, is there any reason SingleKey refuses rent guarantee and on what basis? So if a landlord has a rent guarantee and the tenant does not pay, yeah. So I mean, this comes back to the fine print. I mean, Hannah, happily jump in. If you're acting
Mhm.
above board, you're following your legislation, you're not breaking any laws, um, we're going to honor it. I mean, that's really the basis of the program. It's where if things aren't above board or you're trying, and then again, one case we had here in Ontario, the landlord wouldn't let the tenant move out when the tenant said, "I can't pay anymore. I need to break the lease." We're not going to honor any arrears that fall after that because the tenant's been very transparent with you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we see tenants default for a lot of different reasons, and it's not like it has to meet a specific reason in order for us to pay out here. It could be a job loss, it could be a breakup, or even if your tenant stops paying, but they can't afford the rent, if they're upset about something or they're one of those professional tenants who knows it's going to take a while to evict them and they don't really care, it doesn't matter. We're still going to move forward with the next steps, helping you send the notice and making sure that your rent gets covered for the time it takes to evict them.
Yeah, so I know we got some more questions. Just to kind of be respectful of everyone's time, we are at the hour. I suggest we're going to send out, so just to wrap this thing up, whoops, let me add the right slides in here. We'll do a follow-up email. We're happy to share these slides as well as the recording to the session so you can have it all to review, go back through in detail. If we haven't got your answer covered, which I know we have some more queued up in there, please use that email to respond back to us. And then someone on our team can reach out and personally answer those questions for you, including Hannah on our rent guarantee team as well. So we want to make sure we get all the questions answered for you.
Yeah, and I think in that email, we'll also probably send out a link to our rent guarantee team calendar. So if you did want to book a call with one of our rent guarantee specialists to go over any questions in more detail, we can always arrange that as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. I hope we helped answer some questions. Our upcoming webinar, which will get actually booked here very soon at the end of the month, since it is Fraud Awareness Month, we're going to do a webinar on fraud, tenant fraud, and just red flags and things you can look out for if you've got, say, fake credit scores. We can talk about the IDs, identification, some things to be aware of. We've seen fake pay stubs. And also, actually, I was just at the Calgary landlord trade show yesterday, and I had a property manager come up and explain to me about service animals and emotional support animals, and had a case where some of those documentation, excuse me, was forged. So I think it'll be a really interesting show. We'll bring in some eviction experts too to speak from some different provinces as well. That's going to come up at the end of the month here. We'll send out an email as well on that to share that if that's of interest to you. Thank you very much. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.